We have today a lovely man who is not English, as far as I can tell. His name is Adam. Hello, Adam.
How are you doing, Andy?
We are doing fine. We're cracking on. Adam Holz. So you're not English.
Well, okay. No, I'm not. I'm American. I am like most Americans. I'm sort of a Northern European mix. Holtz is obviously a German name. It means wood. But you will be amused to know that I have Scottish ancestry. And if I go back a couple of generations on my mom's side, their last name was Bonebreak. So I rather like the last name Bonebreak. I think that was a good one. They changed it to Roberts, which is just seems totally boring to me. I would have kept Bonebreak.
You should go back to that. Adam Holz. Do like
I
a
know.
double barrel surname. Adam, bone break. That's good like that.
Adam Bonebreak. I like it. I mean, like if I ever have a metal career, I'll maybe I'll change my name, but I think that ship has sailed.
Fair enough. So we're talking because you are from Plugged In. For people who may not have heard about it, I've known about it for a long, long time, but just give us a
Yeah.
real simple overview. What is Plugged In and what was it all about?
Well, Plugged In is a part of a ministry here in the United States and globally called Focus on the Family that you may have heard of. And our particular charter, if you will, is helping families navigate entertainment, pop culture, and technology. So, the primary thing that probably the biggest thing on our website that people come to see are our movie reviews. So, we review most of the movies that are in wide release. There are a few that will, if they're super, super extreme, every now and then we'll skip one. But our reviews are from a Christian point of view. And our goal is not to give you an aesthetic assessment of how good we think something is artistically, but rather we try as objectively as possible to capture all of the content. So if you're curious about whether something has a lot of profanity or sexual content or drug and alcohol content, you can come to our website and get the information you need to make the best decision possible for your family. But not only do we do movies, we do TV, we do video games, we do YouTube channels, books. So in any given week we publish about 25 to 30 reviews, and we want to equip you and your family with the information you need to make the best decision possible. And at a deeper level, we're also talking about worldview. We're talking about narrative. We're talking about how a given piece of entertainment comes at the world in terms of values. So we also want to think about it on that deeper philosophical level as well. I think that's perhaps a secondary goal. But we hope that as people engage with us over time, they begin to get a sense of how we interact with popular culture from a Christian perspective.
Um, I I guess one of the things, I mean, this is where we found you, is we scroll to Plugged In, we find a movie that we want to watch. I scroll down to the sexual
Yep.
content because, to be honest, I don't really trust the ratings. I'm okay. The UK US has slightly different ratings. They're not that far off, um, but often that's
Right.
not that
Right.
helpful because it doesn't really give you a full flavor. As a Christian, there are things that I don't want to see that might be considered,
Yeah.
well, that's a PG. That all you need for that one, you just need your parents to say
Yep.
that's okay. And actually, there's some stuff that's for
Yep.
kids that really shouldn't be. And that's what I love about Plugged In. That's where we found you. Because we were saying, how do
Yep.
we as a family, how do we know? How do we, unless you physically watch it, how do you know?
Right. Right. No, that's exactly right. And that's the service that we provide people is the peace of mind of knowing that you're not going to have horribly unpleasant surprises that, I call them facepalm moments, it's like, oh, I can't believe that's in there. And even these days, stuff that's aimed at kids, it may not be explicit content, but certainly there is a progressive or an LGBT worldview that is creeping into so many things that some parents are going to want to be aware of. And some families will say, you know what, we can navigate that, we can talk about that. And other families are going to say, yeah, in my kids' entertainment, I don't need propaganda regarding one particular sexual point of view that may not line up with what, the convictions that we have.
Um, Here's another thing I've noticed. So we were on Amazon Prime the other day. We're watching a TV box set, and as you start the program, it comes up with all the warnings about there's going to be drug content or alcohol content or whatever. And one of them was this episode contains
Yeah.
sexual content. We watched the entire episode thinking, where was it? And I still don't quite know where it is. So even those standardized
Right.
warnings, they're not
Yeah.
necessarily helpful. If they're going to tell us stuff that isn't there, it's quite possible they're not going to tell us about stuff that is.
Right. Well, and the other thing is, we have to know what they mean by that language. So another example, um, one of the warnings, at least in the United States, is graphic nudity. When I see that phrase graphic nudity, I have a very specific idea of what that means. But a lot of times it may just be, a scene thrown in as a joke. I'm like, oh, we're going to have a naked guy running in the background. And again, it's problematic. I don't want to see it, but it isn't necessarily what I would have thought of when I saw the phrase graphic nudity, you know? And so it's crazy. Even though we have those descriptions, we want to do the work to identify exactly what we're talking about. One of the examples of the Baywatch movie a couple of years ago had graphic nudity. And, if you're familiar with Baywatch, you would think maybe that was one of the people wearing a swimsuit, but it wasn't. It was a dead guy on a gurney in a morgue, and they pull the sheet back. I'm like, wow, that was so utterly unnecessary.
Yeah, and I think that's it, isn't it? You're providing a much more realistic, objective view that parents, particularly, this is where we came in. We can read through what's going on and decide, is this a great
Yeah,
opportunity that could lead into a discussion about something that would be really healthy to have? Because as Christians, there's no point, in just saying, right, I'm not going to do
exactly.
anything, see nothing ever, because that's not a particularly, it's not a manageable way, and it's not a very helpful way, and it's not a teaching way. But if we know what's coming, we can be forewarned and say, look,
Yeah,
this could be difficult, or here's a discussion point that we can have.
absolutely. I love that, Andy. And that's exactly the philosophy we have. We want to encourage three things. We want to encourage active engagement. So we're not just passively letting this stuff wash over us without thinking about us. We want to engage intentionality. We're watching this movie because we made a choice to do it as a family, and we're going to talk about it afterwards. And then exactly what you were just saying, we want to encourage conversation. It's not just, oh, that's garbage, we're not going to watch that, especially if you have teenagers. I have a 13-year-old, a 15-year-old, and a 17-year-old. And just calling something garbage be a conversation starter. And in fact, if it's something my kids actually care about, I may create a barrier to relationship by just denigrating it and not thinking about it. And so we're always about how can we create conversation. And some things we don't need to have a conversation about, 50 Shades of Grey, we probably don't need to watch it and have a conversation about it. But there's a lot of stuff out there, especially in our culture. We're having this ongoing conversation about the purpose and place of sexuality and how God designed it. And so we need to be having a bigger ongoing conversation about that aspect of our lives, because the culture is having the conversation whether we want to or not. And our kids are going to be exposed to it. And so we have to equip them philosophically and theologically to know, okay, what was God's intent here? How do we think about this? And how is the way the world's communicating about it? How does it not line up with what we believe?
Yeah, and I think it's that teaching part which I really love, because what you're providing is the opportunity to do that. So
Yeah,
you're doing that for movies. The one that I wrote down, which I didn't actually think about, was YouTube. So you're doing what, reviewing
yeah,
channels?
we are. We are. And the YouTube channels are a little bit, it's a little bit more of a representative review. Obviously, if somebody has 3,000 videos on their YouTube channel, we're not reviewing every single one of those, but we'll watch, 8 to 10 videos over time to try to get a representative sampling of what you can expect. So, it's the world just keeps changing, right? And even trying to keep up with at this point, even YouTube feels almost old fashioned with what we're seeing with TikTok and short form video. And so we're constantly seeking to adapt and to give parents the information that they need, so that you know what's going on. Because I think as parents, we can just feel overwhelmed, right? And it's easy to just sort of throw up our hands and say, well, there's nothing I can do about it. That's just the way it is. And you may not know everything your kids are watching, but we can cultivate relationship so that we can have a meaningful conversation about the things that they're interacting with.
Which is so valuable because that ongoing relationship is important. Because when they come across a subject and they think, "Do you know, I don't actually know what that is," I'm quite chuffed that my little lad who's 13 will say, "Dad, I don't know what this means." And sometimes I'll say, "You don't need to know." And sometimes it's a
Right.
conversation that we can have, and I like having the right as a parent to be able to have a
Yeah.
conversation rather than being forced. Now we must talk about this because you've now seen, watched, or heard about something which I didn't think you were
Right.
ready to know about or didn't need to know about. Actually, this
Yep.
way, I get to actually have the opportunity for conversation rather than I must now have a conversation, which
Right.
is a different dynamic, isn't it?
It is a different dynamic. And I think that's the ideal dynamic. And on the flip side, I think that um, even though we hope and wish that our kids are never exposed to things prematurely, sometimes that happens. And in those moments, we also have to be ready to pivot to, okay, I didn't think we were at this point yet, but this has happened. You saw this, you heard about this, your friends said this. Let's talk about that. So I think it's both and. I think in an ideal world, we get to do it on our terms, but if you have teenagers, it's just you don't know what's going to happen. And we're living in a crazy, crazy world, right? I mean, my eighth grader, we were in the car the other day, and I'm not sure how your grades are set up in the UK, but this is the last year before high school, we would call it in the United States. Um, she's 13, and she's talking about friends gossiping about somebody in their class having sex, and I'm like, man, when I was in eighth grade growing up, people weren't having sex, and just this is the reality of the world we're living in because people are looking for meaning, right? They're
Mm.
looking for fulfillment. God has created us to be filled by Him. And if we're not seeking that, we're going to seek it somewhere else. And unfortunately, a lot of kids are looking for that, in some sort of sexual experience. And so we talk about it. And maybe a generation ago, that conversation could have been a one and done, check the box. Okay. That was uncomfortable. But I think, again, that particular conversation is ongoing. And I want to have an open line of communication with my kids to keep talking about it.
Absolutely. Let's just talk briefly about culture. When I was at school, I was about 13, 14 or something, and we had a school trip to France. So we
Uh huh.
stay with the family. We were embedded in the school for a week. It was great. But one of the things that I still to this day cannot ever unsee is the French approach to advertising back then. I don't know now. This is a long time ago. Was we're watching
Yeah.
TV and I'm thinking, okay, interesting French language, and then there's a motorbike advert. Only it's not actually a motorbike advert. It's actually a yogurt advert. And at the end of the advert is this woman who is literally naked, sitting on a bike, eating a yogurt. And I'm there thinking,
Yep.
this to me is not okay. The family are completely unfazed because this
Right.
is just 6 p.m. of an evening around the dinner table. This is just a mainstream
Right.
TV channel. So there's going to be cultural differences, is my point. For me as an Englishman, I was just like,
Yep.
jaw drop. No, but there is a cultural
Right.
difference, and that's what I like about what you're doing because you're not saying this is what you should do or shouldn't. You're saying here is what's
Right.
going on. Make your own mind up. I
Right.
can't unsee that image though. I wished I hadn't,
Right.
but I did, and
Yeah.
that's one of the things that we can, as parents, through somebody like you, plugs in. We can maybe avoid issues like that.
Yeah. Yeah. We certainly want to avoid those things that, if we know they're coming, right? Forewarned is forearmed.
Yes.
I think the saying goes, or maybe it's the other way around. Um, and I think, especially when our kids are young, our role really is being that gatekeeper, right? And really working hard to, as much as possible, to prevent that. And I think as they move into their teen years, it's not that we suddenly don't care anymore, but I think we do move into a conversation that acknowledges that there's stuff like that out there in the world. My 17-year-old and I, he and I were having a conversation a while back, and I just kind of check in with him every now and then on the subject of pornography. And we've been talking about it for years. And, I like to come at it not, are you looking at something, but hey, are your friends engaged in this? Is this something people are interested in? Are they talking about it? And interestingly to me, his friend group seems far less interested than my friend group was back in the day when we had to work very hard to find such things, when I was growing up. But the interesting thing was, he said, yeah, that's not really an issue, but one of my friends has been smoking a lot of marijuana. And so again, that was unexpected, right? But when we keep those lines of communication open, I'm like, okay, well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about, first of all, where is he getting the marijuana? And second, what do you think of that? Let's talk about his choices and your perspective. And then let's talk about why this is really not a very good idea
Yeah.
on any level.
Right. Okay. Let's just go right back in time then. We're not quite that far. But how did you get involved into Plugged In? What's your journey of faith into Plugged In?
It was, from a human perspective, very random. Um, I was involved with a Christian group in college called the Navigators, and they have some folks in England, so maybe people have heard of them. It was a campus group. They have a military outreach. I came out to Colorado Springs in Colorado, where I live, and I was on staff with the Navigators for a couple of years. But I had a writing background. I had an English degree. I got done with an assignment there with the Navigators, and I really had a sense that God was leading me to look for writing or editing work. And I bumped into a friend at a coffee shop, and she said, I have a sister leaving a writing job. You would be perfect for it. And so, from a human point of view, it was just one of those serendipitous things, but obviously God really had his hand on me. And so my first stint with Plugged In was in 1996 and 97, which it was even before we had a website. We started out as a newsletter, and then we were a 16-page magazine. And the website actually launched in 1999. But at that point, I was only there about 6 months, and then I went back to the Navigators, and I was an editor at a magazine that no longer exists, unfortunately, called Discipleship Journal. I was there 7 years, and I've been back at Plugged In since 2004. So about 20 years. And obviously, the jump from pre-internet to internet, and then internet to social media and smartphones. I mean, we've seen, in the last 25 years, we have seen multiple paradigm shifts just in the way that people engage with entertainment and culture. And so, as I mentioned earlier, movies are kind of the main thing that we focus on, but we cover all those other areas as well that I mentioned.
So what's your journey of faith? Are you from a family that was church background, or was that something that you brought into your family for the first time?
No, well, yes, I was from a family with a church background. My dad grew up in a Presbyterian church that was pretty spiritually inert, and my mom grew up in a Methodist church that was similarly spiritually inert. But they both met Jesus when I was about 8 or 9. So at that point, my dad actually started taking me to church. So I grew up in the faith, but like lots of kids, for lots of reasons, my teenage years were kind of a mess, and I did the prodigal thing. I had to go out and learn some hard lessons myself for a couple of years, but it really was my freshman year of college. I just took a look at my life. I'm like, I wasn't ever anywhere near like an alcoholic, but I was going to the bars a couple nights a week, and there was just a deep emptiness to it. It could be really fun to be rowdy and, get drunk with your friends, but I would wake up the next morning, or even sometimes in the midst of it, and think, I don't think this is who I'm supposed to be. And the Jesus thing that I had grown up with, I think I would have said at some point I'm going to come back to that, and I did. Um, but yeah, and then I got involved with the Navigators in college, and the Navigators is a group that really has focused on how do you grow in your faith? What does it look like to take concrete steps in terms of discipleship? And so they had a strong emphasis on Bible study, on scripture memory, on that sort of thing. So at that point, I really began to own my faith for myself, and was able to see some of the things that my parents had discovered on their own.
Fab. I love delving into people's stories, but the ones that I especially love are almost word for word the same. Well, I was doing this, and then this kind of random thing happened, and then God sort of did this thing that I wasn't expecting, and I'm here now, and I love those.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I just sometimes we have, well, in the scripture we have the story of the prodigal son, right? And he's feeding pigs in the slop, and he says, "What am I doing?" Right? And I think that the nature of sin is that it has an immediate appeal, right? When we're doing something excessive in any category, there's a short-term payoff. But then if you just sort of wake up and you have that in the pig slop moment, it's like, oh, I know this is not what I'm made for. I think that there's something much, much better than this. So, but the world has all sorts of messages about what's going to fill us. One of my favorite passages of scripture is Psalm 16:11. It says, "You have made known to me the path of life. You will fill me with joy in your presence and eternal pleasures at your right hand." And I love that promise, you will fill me. God has created us to be filled by our relationship with him. We can't not seek to be filled by something. And so if we reject God, we're going to look for it somewhere else. But I think if we're paying attention, there comes a moment where we're kind of face to face with our futility, right? It's like,
Mm.
this is not working.
Um, so just bring it back to plugged in again. Then, so you're now
Mhm.
running plugged in. How big a team have you got working with you?
It's a fairly small team. There are just five of us. And we have a podcast and we have a radio ministry. So we work with Focus on the Family's radio team a lot, but our core team is just five people.
But you're creating an inordinate amount of potentially problem reducing issues, aren't you? I'm trying to think of a better way of putting it, but I think that sort of sums it up. You're trying to help people
Yeah,
navigate this life. God's made us to be creative. When we look at, I remember this one, the Coca-Cola slogan, even better than the real thing. I remember there was a Christian thing, and I was about 13, and I thought, oh, come
yeah,
on, Jesus is better than the real thing. And I thought, okay, you've done a good copy, but surely if the God that created the heavens and the earth is in us and he's made us like him, can we not do better than just nicking somebody else's slogan and adapting it? Because he's
yeah,
made us to be so creative, right?
right. Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think in the creative space, over the last 40 to 50 years, we have seen a lot of, I would say, evolution, if I can use that word,
Hmm.
of Christian artistry. And I think even where movies that have a faith element are today compared to where they were 15 or 20 years ago, it's light years different. And obviously there are lots of people out there who have a faith orientation who may not be making, quote, Christian music or Christian movies. And so their influence is significant too, but it may be harder to pin down because it doesn't have that particular label on it. But I'm with
Hmm.
you. We should be making the best art. We should be at the vanguard of excellence as opposed to the Me Too copies, that you're talking about, where we're taking something from the world and trying to put, our own little marketing spin on it. But I think on the whole, we're trending in the right direction.
Things are definitely getting better. I don't know what your teen years were like, but for me, I remember in a church because we were trying to do the whole non-hymn thing. So we had choruses, which are just, another way of saying hymn.
Right.
And there were cassette tapes that would come, and somebody somewhere would put this cassette tape together, and they would sing these songs, and it was It was just unbelievably naff and really rubbish quality. And all I could think of even back then was, come on, can we not do better? If we love Jesus
Right.
Christ and we're saying he is the guy who died on the cross for us so we can get to be in heaven, can we not do better than a really dodgy recording on a cassette tape? And I think that's something that has
Right.
sort of affected me throughout my life, thinking we can do better. We must be able to do better. Let's not just copy and imitate, but let's do better. And I love what Plugged In do because you allow parents to do better.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it, right? I mean, we want to be an equipping and an encouraging tool so that in those moments where you feel overwhelmed, where it feels like your kids are just living in this world that you don't understand. And again, I mentioned earlier, my kids are 17, 15, and 13. And my son has gotten into hardcore music recently, which is mostly characterized by, I jokingly call it, and so do some others, Cookie Monster growling and stuff. I'm like, okay, I love rock. I love electric guitars. I'm sitting in a room and I'm looking over and we have 6 electric guitars across the room. But I don't actually, my son has actually gotten to a point where he's embracing a musical style that doesn't do it for me personally. And I don't really get it, which makes me feel a little bit old. But instead of just saying, that's junk, I want to connect with him and understand, well, what is it about this form of art that speaks to you, that draws you in? And so we have great conversations, and he still invites me to go to concerts with him. So I think, again, back to that idea of conversation, we want to have that relationship path open. And I think if we're not careful, we can say things that shut our kids down,
Mm.
or unintentionally maybe shame them, or especially when it comes to music, kids identify so deeply with music. And so if we
Yeah.
sort of, just casually dismiss something as junk, you may be shutting down that avenue of communication with your child, even if it's horrible. Um, let's talk about what's the draw here. Why do you like it so much?
Mm. Every opportunity has the possibility of redemption. I mean, that's the cornerstone of the the bedrock of the Christian faith, right? Is that no matter what's going on, God can redeem it, and even if it's something we don't like, do you know, it's not necessarily bad. I had my senior pastor when I was on a year out. He the one thing he couldn't stomach was peppers, and God called him to Eastern Europe, where a lot of the
Oh
people
boy.
all they could grow really was peppers, and he got there the first day, and they had like stuffed peppers for dinner, and he's thinking, well, I'll just skip this meal. I'll get through it. Breakfast, peppers. Lunch, peppers. And he said to God along the lines of, Lord, I can't do peppers, but if I don't eat this food, I'm offending the family because this is all they have and they want to give me this. So he went to God
Yep.
and he then developed a love and a passion for stuffed peppers, which is great because he was serving in Eastern Europe where this is a lot of what they ate. And
Yeah.
God turned around that intense dislike into something really, really good. And I love that God can do that, even if it's the musical choice of one of our children. We're thinking, what is that? I love how you talked about that, Adam, because you said, let's have a conversation. And it's redeeming what could be bad into something great. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that the reality is that most of the entertainment out there is a mix of good and bad.
Hmm.
And one of the things we do in our reviews is we point out positive elements. And sometimes we'll even get critical letters from people who say, I can't believe you pointed out something positive in X,
Hmm.
in some movie. And I'm like, well, we really strive to be fair. And certainly we will chronicle the bad. And sometimes maybe the bad's 97%, but maybe there's a 3% of it that has some kind of redemptive message.
Hmm.
We want to treat it fairly. And I always try to think when we're writing reviews, if the director or the musician or somebody who was involved with something read our reviews, would they think that they were fair? Because I think we live in this world where we're constantly yelling at each other and
Hmm.
we accuse each other of things, and it's polarized. And I mean, the public discourse is just, it's so toxic
Yeah.
that I hope that we have an opportunity to not contribute to toxicity or unnecessary stridency, but let's have a conversation. And years ago, we actually got a letter from Tom Morello, who's the guitarist for Rage in the Machine, and he said, your reviews are really fair. And that was really a terrific moment. I
Wow.
mean, the guy is an avowed communist. He's not a Christian by
Hmm.
any stretch of anybody's imagination. But that's certainly what we hope for is, we want to be fair, we want to be accurate, and give parents the information you guys need to make your best decisions for your families.
Um, I don't think we can finish this anywhere better, really. I think that's what I certainly have been able to enjoy from accessing Plugged In over the years. It's given the parents some ability to make good choices, and that in today's world, and no different from any other time in history, is going to be important because the world is changing. Our children's lives, what they're experiencing, seeing, and hearing, attitudes around them is going to be different from us. So if we can equip parents in some way, then that's a win-win for me.
Yep, that's exactly right. And as I mentioned earlier, we're part of a bigger ministry focused on the family that also provides resources for parenting, for marriage, and for the challenges that aren't necessarily related directly to entertainment and technology. So again, our hope, coming from a Christian perspective, is that we can give your family hope, that we can give you encouragement, that maybe we can give you a piece of concrete advice, or just that word that in the moments where we're tempted to give up, enables you to say, okay, I can take another step, and it's hard, but we're going to make it through.
Amen to that. Adam, thank you so much for spending some
You
time with
bet.
us. I know we've got some plans to work together in the future, so we'll talk about that another time. But thank you for your time. I love your heart and attitude towards how you want to equip parents, the relationships with your own children. That's precious. All I can say is somebody who's worked in children's ministry in the past is keep going with that, because those relationships too easily fractured by a parent saying, "Oh, that's rubbish," turning it off. And it may be, in
Yep.
your opinion, rubbish, but by saying it is rubbish, you're also saying your opinion is rubbish. And that's
Right.
not something as parents that we ever really want to try and say to our kids. So let's just be careful what we say, I guess, is my thought on that one. And Adam Holz from Plugged In, thank you so much. If people want to find out your website, can you just give us the website so people can access all of your wonderful resources?
Yeah, it's pluggedin, one word.com, pluggedin.com. And we also have a weekly podcast, the pluggedinshow.com. And we have conversations just like this one. This is actually very typical of how we talk about things. So if you've enjoyed our conversation today, check that out. And Andy, I look forward to talking with you more moving forward.
Absolutely. Adam, Plugged In. Thank you kindly, sir.
You bet.